Hey everyone, welcome to Insights with Benny, a space where ideas meet action, where stories inspire reflection, and perspectives challenge the status quo. Whether you're here for clarity, challenge, or quiet wisdom, this is your place. Today's episode is titled Anchored by Fear, the Chains That Sound Like Wisdom. When fear is repeated long enough, it begins to sound like wisdom. Anchored by Fear explores how learned helplessness chains individuals through false narratives, until freedom starts with the courage to question and act. As always, these are straight from the heart of Insight's blog. Let's begin. The Chains of Witherbay. The town of Witherbay was a jewel in the sea, its plantations green, its plains radiant, its shores kissed by clear waters. From a distance, it looked like a paradise. But its beauty was a prison. The people were isolated from the vast mainland, where markets, resources, and riches lay. Two master craftsmen, Aaron and Balin Orstone, were renowned for their boat crafts. Their fathers and forefathers had been boat makers, a line of craftsmen stretching back as far as the elders could remember. Each generation shaped wood with the same instruments, spoke the same wisdom, and told the same stories passed on about the sea. Their boatcraft was not just a skill, it was an inheritance. For centuries, the islanders had sailed the crafts of the Oarstones to fish and visit the edges of their small world. But they hardly crossed to the mainland. Many tried. Each voyage ended the same way. Midway across, heavy storms rose without warning, and waves swallowed the boats, dragging crews into the deep. The unlucky drowned, and the lucky washed back ashore on broken planks. Over the years, whispers turned into conviction. "There is a sea monster guarding the way," the islanders repeated. And so the tale became the norm. It was told in gatherings, recited in festivals, and woven into songs. Plays were performed to warn the young of foolishness. Survivors stood as ominous witnesses. "I saw its shadow. I heard its roar." "None can pass," the survivors would say. Aaron and Balin, the expert boat makers, nodded solemnly in assemblies. "Our boats are fine boats, but we are never meant for the mainland. Do not tempt death," they often recounted. The belief grew so strong that anyone who spoke of crossing was mocked as a dreamer, a fool, or a danger to the community. Each year, an annual ceremony honored the brave but doomed, those who tried and failed. Flowers were cast into the sea, not as a sign of hope, but as a reminder that the sea cannot be conquered. The elders also tell of merchant ships that sometimes stopped to trade, and as an act of kindness, would offer to take an islander across to catch a glimpse of the mainland. Years later, when the ship returned, so too would the islander. And so the people learned to wait for the chance of a passing ship. One day, two young islanders, Cale and Doran, began to ask questions. They said among themselves as they watched a merchant ship far away at sea. "The merchant ships pass these waters," Cale said. "The elders tell us of sea monsters, but how do the ships come and go so freely?" It was as though a long locked gate gave way in Doran's mind, and he said, "Perhaps it was not monsters, but the weakness of our boats. If their ships could endure, then maybe stronger boats could carry us too." They then proposed building a vessel larger than any Aaron or Balin had crafted, reinforced with timber and fitted with floating devices to keep it steady. The townsfolk laughed and said, "Madness! Even Aaron and Balin could not succeed. Who are you to try? Did not the survivors tell us what awaits?" Still, Cale, Doran, and a small team built. They toiled by the shore, gathering timber, shaping beams, ignoring ridicule. People visited just to scorn. Better to dig your own graves here than at sea, the mockery rang out. But at last the day came. Cale, Doran, and a small team set sail, and the town mourned them as though already dead. The storm struck, but their boat, heavy and wide, endured. The waves broke against it, but it did not break. Days later, they saw the mainland. Weeks later, they returned, bringing goods, materials, and fabrics that the islanders had always dreamed about. The people gasped. For a moment, hope flickered, but the elders, Aaron, Balin, and some of the survivors shook their heads, insisting it was a trick of chance. The sea monster must have slept. The currents shifted. Perhaps the sea let them pass only to trap others. Do not be deceived. Eager for the comfort of their old fear, the people nodded in agreement. They dismissed Cale and Doran as lucky fools. Songs were updated. Yes, some returned, but only by chance. To try again is still death. And so, Wither Bay remained what it had always been, a green island bound in invisible chains. Surrounded by the beauty of the sea, its people chose to stay isolated. Not because they could not cross the sea, but because they believed they could not. The craftsmen, the elders, even the survivors all knew deep down that if they ever supported the building of bigger boats or ships, the islanders would cross the sea freely. But they would rather feed their fears than feed their hopes, because fear had become safer, easier, and far more familiar than freedom. When fear becomes familiar. The Chains of Wither Bay tale is a story about learned helplessness. This happens when people begin to believe they have no control over their situation, even when they actually do, because their past efforts to change things were unsuccessful. After several failed attempts, they stop trying altogether, telling themselves, why bother? Things can't change. Just accept, consume, and adapt. At first, it is not always obvious. It shows up in the way people make decisions about important issues that affect their lives. Slowly, they give up their power and agency. They begin to think their judgments do not matter, so they let others decide for them. Over time, they lose confidence, become passive, and start waiting for someone else to take action. This loss of motivation often accompanies negative self-talk, such as, we can't do this, or I'm not good enough. Learned helplessness develops over time in environments that reinforce it. People who once showed resilience begin to give up quickly because they expect failure. The constant thought of defeat weighs heavily on their conversations, and their energy for change fades. They adapt, but not by overcoming. They adapt by surrendering to the situation. This is precisely what happened on the island of Wither Bay, a land full of promise and beauty, but cut off from the mainland and its riches. The storm, or the perceived monster, became the symbol of a system too potent to fight. Each failed attempt to cross the sea reinforced the people's conviction that it was impossible. The story reflects different situations, such as resisting injustice, facing an economic crisis, breaking a bad habit, or even trying to lose extra weight. The experts in this case, the boat makers, elders, and survivors, people the community trusted, reinforced the idea that nothing could change. Their words and authority strengthened the conditioning. Festivals, songs, and entertainment, including media, helped sustain the belief. Even when Cale and Doran succeeded, their victory was dismissed as a chance. The system of fear remained stronger than the proof of freedom. That is the paradox of learned helplessness. Possibilities exist, but people cling to the comfort of fear. For instance, elites may boast openly of subverting the people's will, manipulating elections, silencing dissent, or stripping people's rights. Yet the people would share the clips as memes, laugh or grumble in private, and take no action. Either because they are afraid to act, or because they are convinced that nothing will change. However, real change begins the moment we choose not to wait for others, but to act for ourselves. The comfort of the cage. How learned helplessness is sustained. Learned helplessness does not exist in isolation. It is sustained by systems and agencies that enable it to thrive and grow. Almost every social institution either dismantles or reinforces the conditioning that keeps people powerless. Examining these agencies closely helps us understand how learned helplessness is maintained and how we might overcome it. One of the strongest agencies that sustains it is the learning system. Education is meant to equip the mind to address life's challenges, but when learning, whether in school, at home, or in other settings, discourages questioning, it conditions people to accept what they are told without challenge. A system that rewards obedience and memorization over critical thinking teaches people not to question or challenge ideas or norms. Paulo Freire described this as the banking system of learning, where knowledge is deposited and withdrawn, rather than questioned and created. In such an environment, learned helplessness develops because people are conditioned to comply rather than to think creatively and imagine new possibilities. The media is another powerful agency. It often reinforces what the learning system has planted. Constant cycles of similar stories of crime, disasters, and division make the world appear dangerous and unchangeable. By repeating stereotypes, the media can lead people to believe that the status quo cannot be altered. It also promotes the experts-only framing, where ordinary people are told that they cannot understand basic economics, politics, psychology, or health without the guidance of specialists. This discourages self-empowerment and critical thinking. In the Wither Bay tale, the boatmakers and the survivors dismissed Cale and Doran's ideas because they were not the recognized experts. And if the experts say we can't, then they must be right. Social media takes this further. Its algorithms prioritize content that reinforces existing patterns, and people are conditioned to consume rather than to question. Cancel culture and online pile-ons instill fear in individuals, discouraging them from speaking out on the issues. Instead of becoming active participants, people become passive observers. Change is equated with virality. Only what trends seem to matter. Someone making small, consistent changes in their life is often ignored or even ridiculed because they are not going viral. In this way, social media shifts focus from agency to spectacle. The entertainment industry also plays a role. It amplifies what learning agencies and media sustain, glamorizing elites while portraying ordinary people as powerless or dependent on heroes. This normalizes the belief that change is only possible for a chosen few and that rescue comes from outside. Entertainment also nurtures escape culture. Endless, binge-worthy shows and content, which provide distraction instead of empowerment, teach people to numb frustrations instead of confronting them. All of these agencies work together to condition people to accept their situation as ideal. The framing is powerful because it shapes what feels natural. People begin to comply, to accept, and to believe that no change can ever come from within. In the Wither Bay story, the narrative glorified the rare visits of the merchant ships, reinforcing the idea that only outside help could bring hope. We begin to internalize views such as, our people can't succeed within this. We want a good life, but not the work that builds it. Our community is too broken to fix. Change is impossible because a parasitic, warped ideology already consumes us. It's who we are now. Some societies still wait at the shore, convinced rescue will sail in with gifts bound in chains, such as aid. Yet real change begins not with foreign ships, but with the courage to build within our own islands. The cycle within. From individual struggles to community traps. The effects of learned helplessness start at the individual level. A worker who is repeatedly passed over for a promotion may stop trying, even after improving their skills. A person who has tried and failed to lose weight may resign themselves to being unhealthy. A young person who grew up on superhero stories may internalize the belief that problems can only be solved by extraordinary individuals, rather than through ordinary effort. Some stay in toxic environments, convinced there is no escape. Others stop learning new skills because they assume they will fail before they even try. Even minor setbacks, such as failing a test or struggling with a new technology, reinforce the cycle of helplessness if the conditioning is strong enough. When the effect of learned helplessness is multiplied across a community, these individual choices become collective patterns. Societies constantly exposed to cycles of poverty, crime, and victimhood begin to believe that nothing will ever change. The refrain becomes, "Nobody cares. Why try?" The last time someone stood up, they were silenced. Others come to believe that only by being loud or controversial can they make an impact, because that is what the media rewards. A system that tells the poor and vulnerable that their only hope lies in handouts further deepens this mindset. Instead of joining with change agents to create solutions, people retreat into waiting for the next handout or miracle. In Wither Bay, rather than working with Cale and Doran to build a stronger boat, many continued to dream that the merchant ship might one day take one of them to see the mainland. Learned helplessness persists because these agencies, learning, media, and entertainment, condition people to believe that power lies elsewhere, never within themselves. The challenge begins when individuals recognize these patterns and choose, like Cale and Doran, to act, despite the voices that say, it cannot be done. Building stronger boats. Choosing agency over fear. Learned helplessness is not a life sentence. It can be resisted, unlearned, and replaced with courage. Like Cale and Doran, we can choose to build differently. The first step is to challenge the old and existing stories. We must ask, who benefits from my believing this? Refuse the narrative of inevitability and rewrite the narrative in your mind. Change doesn't need viral waves. It begins with small, consistent steps. Own your agency, every action matters, and recognize that no miraculous ship is coming. Reframe failure, not as proof of doom, but as a lesson for the next voyage. Stronger boats are built from the wrecks of old ones, if we are willing to learn. Rephrase your self-talk. Notice where you say they instead of we, or we instead of I. Agency begins when you claim responsibility for what you can do. Change multiplies when belief is shared, but it always starts with the courage to act. Reflection. The greatest tragedy of Wither Bay was never the storm or the sea monster. It was that the people chose to believe fear over freedom. They mocked hope because it unsettled the comfort of their caution. Yet learned helplessness is not permanent. It can be unlearned. The Cale and Doran who dare to try again prove that storms are not destiny. The sea may be vast, but it is not unconquerable. Change begins with those willing to build, to endure ridicule, and to show that the impossible can be done. Fear keeps helplessness alive, but action makes it die. The storms we face may feel overwhelming, the obstacles real, yet the story we tell about them often matters more than the challenge itself. The choice is always ours. Remain ashore, clinging to fear, or step forward to build and to sail. Only when we sail will we discover that freedom was within reach all along. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them on social and tag me. Please subscribe to my channels. Follow, like, share, and help spread the message. Until next time, stay reflective.